Hello there, this is Josh at Logic Chronicles, and we're going to continue on with the dialogue system. Last time we just created these folders, created this, we threw in a whole bunch of variables here, all these structs over here in that enum. We filled in, or we kind of did some functions and added some stuff to the root component, or the root dialogue context that I had here. We even did some work in this one, adding some variables here and a couple functions into the subcontext. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the interface function, or not interface function, but the interface over here, and we're going to add in a couple of functions here. Right? Now we are going to add in two. First one we're going to do is scan enter dialogue. Alright, now this one, off on the return, we're going to return, what was that, 4 variables. First one, we'll just put a question mark there. And the whole idea, what we're going to do is we're actually going to pass in here the actual dialogue component from the other actor that we actually want to check if they can enter dialogue. We're just going to pass in that actor itself, and we're also going to pass in the an audio component from that actor if it has one. Looking at this now, I guess we technically don't need to actually send in the other actor, only because when we actually do this, we'll probably sending this interface to that actor anyway, and that's what happens when you actually get to go back through your stuff and kind of not update it, but optimize it. Alright. Sorry about that. Alright, now we also need one more, and it's the audio. Alright. Got that all good and dandy. Now we'll make one more. And this one will be enter dialogue. Now, this will make sense later on why we're doing this, but we need 3 variables here. Now we need the first one to be the actual, we'll say, dialogue component. Alright. Now over here this was actor, and we'll leave this one as audio. Now this is going to be other actor dialogue components. Gotta love me misspelling a whole bunch of stuff all the time. Alright, the other dialogue component, and now what we need is other actor. Now what we need is audio component. Alright. Audio components. Alright. So we got those. Now this'll, we gotta name this, sorry about that. Say enter dialogue. Alright. So this will actually end what we need for the interface. We won't actually need to come back to the interface at all. Unless I was wrong, we actually do need to pass that. No, we don't. That's not important. Alright. So that's it for the interface. Now the next part of what we're gonna go over to, we'll finally get into this dialogue component. Okay. Now, when this loads up my other screen, there is quite a bit of stuff that goes on in here. Nothing too complicated. But now, actually, before we do this, let's take care of something first before we do that. That way we can actually start testing this. We're going to be using this guy right here to actually be our NPC that we're talking to, and he will also be what we're going to use to play with. Alright? So we're going to go over here to the third-person blueprints, come over here, grab him, and just throw him out here into the regular content. Alright? Now, he's here. I'm going to make another folder off to the side and call it test content. Now the reason why is because in here we don't actually want to, like I said before, what you're going to want to do is you want to take this whole folder and you want to actually go here and you want to migrate it, and everything in it will be like right here. And you got all this, right? And then you'll say OK, and then find whatever project you want it to go to, and you just send it over. But we don't want really all of our testing stuff to go with it, so we can just put this here for now. Alright, and we'll put some of the other stuff, like we'll make children of these and these, and we'll put them over here, so that way they're just in a separate folder. So everything that actually belongs in here for the dialogue component to actually work and all that will be just in here, and all here in the other test component, other test content will be just stuff that we're just playing around with. Alright, but in here we'll open this up. We won't touch any of that. What we will touch though, as soon as I actually open it up, because close that and come over to this other one. We're gonna basically do a line trace, or actually a sphere trace, because sphere trace is a little more better. A little more better. Yeah, of course. Now, come here, in anywhere in the graph, and we'll have action. No, actually not an action event. It is event E. Input events. Wait, no, sorry. Input E. Well, that's not what it's called. Then what was this under? Keyboard event, probably. Yeah, keyboard event. It doesn't matter. But we'll go over to E. Keyboard event E. We have this. Alright. Now, what we're going to want to do is, if you've never done a line trace before, or a sphere trace, don't worry. It's fairly simple. Drag off the camera. We're going to get world location right here. So wherever this is in the world, and mind you, this is the actual point of this camera right here, back here, the actual point in the world of this. Now what we're going to get is a forward vector. And this forward vector, in case you're not familiar with this, it is the actual like forward direction that this is facing, just forward from here. Okay, so if this guy is rotated like this, going this way is now his forward vector, or for the camera. Okay. Now what we'll do, we'll say sphere trace by channel. We'll actually plug in this one right here at the start location. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna draw a sphere from this camera to some point out in front of it, and we're gonna check if anywhere from there, if that sphere actually crosses anything. Okay. Now we are going to take this forward vector. We're gonna multiply this by, I said 1,000 here, 1,000, and then we'll add these two together. And then we'll throw it in here, and we'll make the radius of the sphere about 10. And so you can see it, this debug, the debug will be, make sure you draw debug to duration. Alright. Now, just a quick to show you what this is actually going to do, in case you've never done this before. Hit play. And it's lagging a little bit. Okay, there we go. Now if I hit enter, there, you see that? That's what it did. It's going to make that kind of, that sphere, and what it's going to do is it's going to check if anything crosses. So if I go over here to this box, notice how it goes through the box. You have the other line. It goes through the box, but it hit that point. That's what we want. We're going to check if if that point is actually a character. We're actually going to check if it hit that character, and then we're actually going to use that instead. Okay. Before we do that, though, let's come over to these class settings. And over here in our interface, we're going to add dialog interface. Right there. Okay. Now notice we have this interface right here. This is what we had before. Alright. Now, you want to hit this for check that off as yes, so are true. Now we want to come up here and say dialog components. Bring this down here. We also want to add an audio component. Alright, and we'll take this, we'll throw that in there. So like I was, alright, so if you're not familiar with how interfaces work, what we're basically going to do is this function right here that we just created, is basically going to be like a it's kind of like a normal function, only it's kind of like you're using it as a message to something. Okay, and I'll explain that in 1 second. Let's just put it in context so it makes a little more sense in case you never used that before. So break. Okay. Now what we want to do is we break this, right? So if at any point it hits something, right? So if it hits this, this is true, it's going to return something, and this is going to be the information that it returns for when it hits something. We're going to have this actor that it hits. We don't know what kind of actor it is. It could be anything. It could literally just be some sort of mesh actor in the world. It could be a character. It could be an item. It could be whatever, right? But instead of casting to it and trying to figure out what it is, because you know if you're making a game, you have a lot of different classes and stuff. It can get pretty consuming trying to figure out cast here failed, cast there failed. We're not going to do that. Instead, we'll say can enter dialog, and we're going to send a message to it. And what's going to happen is if it uses this interface, if whatever we cast it to, or whatever we sent this message to, this hit actor, if it uses this interface, it's going to return all these values from this function. Okay. If it does not use this interface, then all these values are just going to be blank. So if it doesn't use this interface, right here, this right here will just always return false. But if it uses this interface and we actually put these values in it, then it's actually going to call this function and return these values for us. And now these values are going to be filled in with something that we put in beforehand. So for instance, if we have another thing like just say if I come over here and if I say we created, let's just pretend we created a sphere right here, some sort of sphere actor, and it didn't use this interface, but I hit it. It would send the interface to it, but since this sphere doesn't have that interface used with that function, it won't actually return anything useful. It'll just have like that false right here, be false, and then these won't return anything. But if I use the interface on this sphere, if I don't actually plug anything into that function, it'll still call the function, but it will still return just false, and then the rest of them will be blank. But then once we actually go into the this class, we actually add this interface here. Where'd it go? We actually add this interface, and then we actually add things to this function. It'll return stuff for us. All right. It's probably a lot to say all at once, but now what we want to do is, now that we have that, we want to send another another message to the dialog component that from this character. So the way to think about it is this actor is going to have some sort of dialog component if it can talk or it can enter dialog, and we're going to return the dialog component from the other actor. Okay. We should probably change this to other. Sorry. All right. So this is other. Right there. Okay. So this is the other dialog component that's being returned. Okay. It's not the same one that this in our character. It's gonna be like the NPC's dialog component. And the whole idea would be the dialog component will be kind of two parts. It'll hold the information for the NPC that it needs to talk, and it'll also allow our character to kind of interact with them, or well, for the player to. Now we'll say, what was that event called? Let me just remember what it was. Okay. Enter dialog. Say enter dialog message. If these aren't showing up, hit context sensitive. You should be able to find it. If for whatever reason it's not there. So there, we got that, right? The pass will do that. Hit the execution there. Put this there, this there. This is what I was saying before. What I did was I had it returning the other actor, and I plugged that in, but we already have that right here, so there's no point of doing that. Okay. I'm going to actually just come here and break that, and then do this. Just make sure it's nice and clean. So we got that, and just to double check, that is it. And we are done with this guy. We will not need to open it up again. But this is really all it takes to set up your character, so we can actually enter dialogue with another actor of any sort that can have a dialogue. So for instance, if you have an actual character and they have a dialogue component, they can start that. But if you want just a plain old actor, like say you have a statue, like some magic statue that talks, well, all of a sudden now that statue can talk even though he's not technically a character or even a pawn. If that makes sense for you. Alright. So if this returns false no matter what, it's not going to do anything. So you don't have to worry. This is only going to return true if it hits some sort of actor that actually has this interface, and this returns true. That means we've actually set this up over here. Okay. So that's all that. And we can close out this, just this one actually. Now over here if you don't know where I'm right now, just dialog component. Okay. Now that we're actually in here, we can start doing some other stuff. Okay. Now we can get rid of this event tick. We're not going to use it, other than just debugging. But even still, I probably won't need to do that right now. Okay. Now we're gonna go and we're gonna make a macro. Let's say is player. Actually, is owner player. That's a lot better. Now we'll come over here to the inputs, and the first one will be an execution, and we'll say alright. Which is a nice little thing. If you ever use macros, you know, you see here if I add another one, has parameter. I don't like that. I can just put in execution, or I can put in or execute, and then I can put this, then, and those are 2 words. It'll just clear that out, so it looks pretty. Okay. So if I go into this on my other screen, what I got is one thing that's nice about a component is we can get owner. Okay, we can get owner. Sorry about that. We can get owner. Now we can cast to it. And we're going to cast to a pawn. Now from here, we can say is player controlled. Now this is kind of nice, because now that we know if it's player controlled or not, we can actually bring that information out. Is it a player, yes or no? Okay. And we will make another little node right here, connect that. There we go. So there's all that's going to do. You could, whoa, didn't mean to do that. You could probably add other functionality to this that you really need to. Oh my gosh, it doesn't like to stay. There we go. You can add other functionality to this, so like you can then cast again and get the player controller, which I feel like I've done at some point in here, but I'll have to look back and see where I actually did that. But you can actually do that. You can just cast the player or get the controller from here. Oh yeah, I did do that in another function. I should have done that here. We'll do that here because that's actually kind of useful. We actually need. All right. And from this pawn, we'll say cast we'll say get controller. This controller right here. We'll say cast to player controller. Okay. So we're gonna get the player controller from that pawn. If it failed to cast for whatever reason, we'll go down there. This should not happen really, because if it's a player and begin with, it should have this. But you never know. Who knows? Alright, now we'll promote this to a variable and we'll say player controller. We'll use this later on when we're actually creating the widget that's actually displaying things, which will be nice. So we got that. Alright. Now we're going to drag this out, put that there. Now the reason for this is a very, very important thing right here. We actually want to, now what we can do is if it's a player, we can do logic off here if it's a player. If it's an NPC, we can do logic off of that. So for instance, if an NPC, say we want to actually get conversations in and stuff like that, and actually figure out, okay, well what class is he? You know, what race is he? What faction is he from? We can actually come off of here and start actually doing logic to actually, you know, insert all that logic for later. But for now, we're not going to do that. Let's say spawn actor from class. Okay, now the class will be dialog logic actor. We'll just make transform. Doesn't actually matter what I just do just cause I like to kind of just set this, like, whenever I'm making something that doesn't matter, I'll usually leave it on the z-axis but put it somewhere really high or somewhere really low. Why? I don't know, I just like doing it. Alright. This shouldn't be a problem, but just make sure you set always spawn, ignore collisions. Because if you don't do that, if it collides with something for whatever reason, you know, we want it to always be there. We don't want it to, like, never not spawn for any reason. but you know, just make sure you do that because that's useful for later. Then promote this to a variable. We'll say logic actor. There we go. So we have this logic actor here right now. You have to respawn it. Now, the next thing that we got to do is we have to start using the interface. Okay, and we'll actually comment this out. Say C begin play. There we go. So we got that. Now we'll search up events. Well, actually, we got to use the interface first. We'll implement it here. Add dialog interface. So we don't actually have to worry about this because we're never going to be We're never going to be sending that interface message to this. So this is completely fine to leave blank. We're never going to like do anything with this component like that. The only thing we're going to do is we're going to use this event. Enter dialog. There it goes. So what's going to happen, right? If you remember, back over in our character, we'll put this right here. Dialog components. Break that. Throw that in. Alright, there we go. Sorry, if that happens to you, that's just a quick way to fix it. Sorry about that. Okay. Now, back to here. Notice here how what we're doing is we're sending a message to that, right? We're getting the other dialog component back, and we're getting the other audio back, right? Now what we're doing is we're putting it in here, and we're sending it to our dialog component. Simple enough, right? So when that happens, it's going to come all the way over here. Now we're going to start doing stuff with it. Alright. So what we can do with that now is we're actually going to promote this to a variable. We'll say other actor. No, other, right? Alright, other actor. Now we're going to promote this to a variable. Oh, I spelled it wrong there too. Oh, lovely. Alright, there we go. Okay. Now we're going to promote this to a variable. We'll say other, and I did it again. Dialog component. Alright, we got that. Now we're not going to promote this, we're going to do something else with that. Before we do that, right now would be a good time to start making that widget. Okay, to start making the widgets. Now the reason why is because there's another macro that I put after this that's going to actually check to make sure that the widget is even on the screen and stuff like that and handle that. So before we do that, we're going to close this down. Close this right here. And we'll come over to this widget folder, right? And now on this widget folder, we're going to create a widget right down here. Let's say dialog. There's probably a better name for this that you could probably find. Scroll box underscore widget. Now, we'll come back to actually designing that in a little later. Probably in the end of this video, maybe the next video. I haven't quite decided quite yet because I'm actually just kind of improvising how I'm going to do this on the spot right now. Alright. So that's one thing we want to, so we won't do that now. Alright. We'll come over here to this. Oh, lovely. What do we got over here? Events, enter dialog. There we go. We'll do that so again. Put that there. Oh, there we go. Alright. So now that we have that, we can actually start going in and coding this part of it. Oh, wrong screen. Hold up. Let me just pull it up on my other screen here. Alright. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make another macro right here. We'll this one is gonna be called add scroll box. We're gonna add a scroll box here. We'll add scroll box to we're gonna add scroll box to screen. That's what it's gonna do. Now we'll say get owner. If it'll show up, get owner. There's that. Now we'll cast. Actually, we don't need to do that because that's the whole point of what we did before. Instead, what we'll do is we'll get rid of that right here. We'll take this off, the player controller. And we'll say is valid. Throw that here. This is just kind of a really nice thing to do. You know, whenever you have things like this, like instances like this that might not be there by default, it's probably a good idea to actually check if it's valid first, because trust me, it can cause you problems when you're testing it later. Okay. Now we're gonna do. If this doesn't work, what you can do, or actually come here, you could just kind of copy and paste this in right here. Or what we could do is we could just bring this over here, because that's the nice thing about coding. We'll throw that right here. It's kind of redundant, but it's just a kind of a fallback safety thing just to make sure that it actually gets done. So if it's not valid, that means for whatever reason something didn't happen here. Like maybe it spawned originally as an AI, but then you possessed it as a player. So then you come here, and originally it's not true, so it does something else, and then later on you possess it as a player. So over here, it might not be valid. So then, once you're actually controlling this as a player, you want to do this again, just to make sure it actually is working. Okay. Do that. Now, if this doesn't work, we're not going to worry about that, because at this point, it should work on this. If it doesn't do that, you can probably find something else. But chances are, you know, that situation shouldn't happen. But if you want to prepare for it, go ahead. It's better to have a game that actually works and not crashes. But for right now, I'm not going to worry about it. So, what we want to do is we're going to say create widget. And this is going to be actually before we do this, let's go over to this widget component. Or not widget component, this widget, this plain widget, and we'll come up, open it up, graph, and we'll add a variable, and we'll say dialog component. We'll come here and say dialog components right there, and we will turn it into editable, and we will make it exposed on spawn. Because sometimes when you create a widget and then like you go through and you try to actually like put it over here, sometimes these pins don't come in all the time, and it's annoying. Alright, so we go there, we're going to take the player controller, and we're going to plug that into owner, or the owning player, and then we'll say self here. So this will be the dialog component itself that's going in here that we need. Okay, this won't be this dialog component, we're in the component itself, we're going to pass that through. Alright, and actually we don't need to put that there, we'll break this. We'll promote this to a variable. Say scroll, it's not typing. Oh, yes it was. Scroll box widget. Okay. So we have that done. We'll lower this. We're going to pull off here and check if it's valid. Valid. Okay. Now with that, we'll bring this here. Now the whole point of this is just if we've already created it, there's no point of recreating this every single time. Especially for something like a dialog box and stuff like that. You want this to kind of be persistent. You know? And I'll talk more about later why when I actually talk about how the dialogue can be put in the screen. Because that way, because this will actually do two things. It'll display the actual dialogue the NPC is saying, and it will also display any like possible options you can pick from. So it's and if you want your NPCs to like just dynamically go over and talk to the player, you kind of would like this to kind of have it already there. Like if you want an NPC just to walk up to a player and start talking to them, it'd probably be nice to have this already there, so you don't have to do that again. So now what we'll do is we'll pull off here and say is in viewport. So if it's, then we'll say branch. We'll throw that down there. Okay, let me just scroll over on the other screen. Now we'll say if it's not, if this is full, we want to bring this up here too. If it's not, we'll say add to player screen. Alright, it's added to player screen. Now what we can do is we can come here. We can do this and that. And we can come all the way back here, grab that, bring it here. And what I did was I brought in this this failed statement right here, or this failed, no, false. Let's bring that right here. Put it right here. So again, this is if like we try to get the player controller, and it turns out it's not actually even a player. That false right there. Bring that over here. 1, 2, and what did I call this? Here. I'll say success and failed. There we go. Now we'll come over here, and we'll come to this. Let's go box the screen, and this is screen right here. There we go. There we go. So we got that fixed. Now, next step, let's make our first function over here. Alright. Let me pull this up on the other screen. Oh, actually, no we do not. Not yet. Hold up. Hold up. Wrong function. Okay, this function. Over on the other screen, what I got is another function, and we'll say get NPC roots dialog context. Okay. So what this is gonna do is we want to get the other component, right? But before we get the other component, we want to add a variable here. Say root dialog context class. Okay. Now we want to actually look this up. Dialog context. Now we come here and we want to make sure this is a class reference. So we got that. Now what we can do is we'll take this and put it under category of NPC. Okay. So this will be in the other component that we're getting this from, but since we're talking about this dialog component, we're getting this variable from the other component, not the component that we actually have. Okay. There's a couple points where that distinction between what's this dialog component and the other dialog component is very important. So get root. There we go. Get it? Now, is valid. Now this is kind of important that you make sure that this is actually valid, because it's just very important. Because if not, I remember when I was testing it and I forgot to actually put things in for this and actually make sure it wasn't null, and I was getting problems and it's crashing. So to avoid problems like that, we want to make sure it's valid. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually construct this object. Okay. Now you can't just go spawn actor from class, because this is not an actor. This does not work for this. Instead, we have to do is say construct object from class. It's a little bit different. You have another pin right here. It's an outer. I forgot what this means actually for coding, but for our purposes, it doesn't really matter. All we have to do is we have to make sure this is actually filled in. I'm pretty sure it'll actually, yeah, see it gives us a problem. We need to actually fill that out. So what we'll do is something very useful. We'll just say self, because we need itself we'll just have that for self. And we'll also have this because it needs to be put in there. This is the dialog component that needs to be in this when it's constructed. So we can actually use it and reference it later. Alright? promote this to a variable, and we'll say roots dialog context. Alright, so that's what that'll be. And we can return this. And we can return it here just to make things a little bit easier. Root context. Okay. The main reason is we want this to kind of be persistent throughout the conversation. And to return it is just easier so we don't have to, like, you know, get it. We can call this function and just get it instead of having to, like, actually call the function and then get separately. Just to make lives a little bit easier. Okay. So after we do this right here, we are going to call this function. We're going to attempt to get it. Now we're going to check is valid. Throw that there. Make sure it's actually working and make sure it actually did what it was supposed to do. Because, you know, this can still return right here and then it'll just return null right there. We won't have anything in there, which is kind of useful. Alright, now what we can do is we can say get greeting. And while I'm thinking about this, this should be a pure function. So we'll come over here, and we'll change that to a pure function. Alright. And we'll come back, we can close this, close that. Come here. So it's a pure function. So now what we'll do is we'll start, before we use this, we want to start actually adding in how to use the actual audio. Okay. Now we'll come here. We'll create another variable. We'll say npc voice. We'll say string, and we'll come to a map. And this map will be of type audio component. Let me just double check. Yes, audio component. Audio component. Okay. Now this is going to be a little confusing at first until you see the method of my madness that goes on in here. We'll say add. Alright. It won't be in this part, it'll be in the next part after we create the next custom event. Actually, come here and say make literal string. Now, ideally what you would want to do is we're going to have this right here, right? This make literal string. The whole point is to keep the name consistent with what we're doing when we're referencing things. We want to keep this name exactly the same as what we put in here as to what we're going to put into the next event that's going to fire off to actually display the dialogue. So when we have the dialogue displayed on the screen, it will be the dialogue displayed for whatever name of the NPC. So you're going to have to manually go in somewhere over here, actually get the name of the NPC that we're talking to, and then put it in here by itself and find a way to manually do that. Okay? I'm not going to, or we could have actually done it in the interface too. I mean, there's different ways you could possibly do this, but we're just going to do it this way. And we're going to do here for the name and say NPC. Okay? Now we can we can create another event. Let's say custom event. And actually, we're almost done with this. I'm going to comment this off. Say enter dialogue. Right there. There's going to be this event is going to be called again at the end of this, so we can just leave a little room here. But we're going to make it first so it actually works, and then we'll call it. Now we'll say add display dialogue. Okay. Now what we'll do is we'll add one variable and say dialogue. See, this is where I kind of got inconsistent with what I was doing before. So remember how these are answers? So I'm gonna stay consistent. And that shouldn't even be dialogue anyway. This should be an answer. That's what it should be. We'll say unit answer. Now if I break this off, I will have all the stuff that we had before about dealing with dialogue. Okay? But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add another variable. We're going to say name. we'll say NPC name. We're gonna add another one. Say use continue button. This would be a boolean. And then we'll say voice. Voice byte. So there goes that. Okay, so we're gonna pass those through. And yeah, so another thing too is this for this voice, you're gonna have to do the same thing. You're gonna have to figure out what the NPC name is over here, and you're also gonna have to figure out what its voice should be. Alright. And over here, we just need to call it. Let's say add dial. What did I do? Let's name this. Add display dialog. There we go. Add display dialog. There, we got that. I put another widget, or not another widget. I put another event here called control widget control. And what that'll do is it'll basically give us a nice little transition, so we can actually, you know, put focus on the widget and have the mouse actually show up and stuff like that. But we'll do that later, after we actually get this working. Put that there. NPC name there. You might need to manually do this too. I mean, there are some instances where you're gonna want the dialogues displayed on the screen, but you're not actually gonna want, you know, to actually take control of the you don't actually want the widget to take full control, so the player can just move around the screen, the dialogue will display, and then delete itself after. You know, like when you're passing by and you know you hear some sort of NPC saying, "Oh, I was once an adventurer like you, and then I got shot in the knee," and then you don't want that. Okay, you want it to actually move around and not have it like take full control, so you're stuck in dialogue. So that's the whole point. You know, there are points when you don't want to do that. Just let it run. All right. Now this voice byte, we'll leave that as 0 for now. Again, you're gonna have to figure out how to actually do this later. Alright. Now ideally when you actually have NPC that just talk, just say one line that's not really important, that's just passing, you'd want to call this function on that dialogue component and have it come through here. So that way it kind of loops through, but it doesn't actually interfere with anything going on. So if you have like another character speaking in the background, oh, we actually need to hook this up to that right there. Right there. Okay. So like I was saying, so that way if you have another character talking in the background while you have options displayed and while you're trying to talk to another NPC, you know, they won't interfere with the main character you're talking to. Okay, they won't interfere with these variables. Now we'll make another variable. And we'll say NPC speaking. We'll have this be another string. We'll have another map going to integers, that's fine. We'll come here, and we will say add. The whole point is, again, like if we have multiple talking, we want to keep track of who's talking, who's saying what, and what's displayed on the screen at a time, okay? So this is going to be very, very important. Do that. You can add in 0 here, but by default, it'll always be 0. If you don't actually put another number in. Okay. Now from here we actually got to start designing the widget, okay? So that way we can actually design what's going to be displayed on the screen. Alright, come over to widget, come here. Okay. Let me just get situated. Alright. So, the way I found that this is going to look the best is to kind of have a blank. You won't actually see this. It'll always be technically on the screen, but you won't actually see it in game. And it's kind of a weird system that I've used here. There might be a better way of doing this, but this is the way that I found works. Okay. Now, what we're gonna want to do is we want to take over here and say border. We want to anchor this to the bottom right here. This is where I found it to be the best kind of looking for presentation. I'm going to come here and say alignment 0.5 so it gets right in the middle there. But then what we want to do is we want to take this Y position and say -50. So that way it's just above that. Okay. And what we'll also do is I set the X to 900 and I set the Y to 40. These numbers don't matter right now, I can tell you that much right now. because these are going to change later. We'll hit size of content, but not yet. And that's the reason why I said these numbers kind of don't matter right now. We'll come here to this brush, we'll set this all the way down. Actually, we don't need to do that, just set this to 0. You might be like, well, what's the point of that? Like I said, there's probably a better way to do this, but this is the way I initially did it, and I want to make sure it actually works, because you probably don't need this border. You probably just do what I'm doing right now, which is get a vertical box, and throw it on top. You can probably have this as the child, but I don't want to like mess this up, and I want to make sure it works first, because again, I didn't exactly optimize everything I did yet. I just kind of threw things together, it worked. So you're actually getting a much cleaner version than what I was originally working with. So yeah, I got a spacer, threw it in here. For this spacer, what I used was, X on 900, Y of 10. Okay. Now we're going to click this, and we're going to copy it. I'm going to paste in 3. So we got 3 right there. Now we're going to say scroll box. Scroll box. Alright, now we'll throw 1 in, and we'll say 2 in. This one up between that, and we'll do this one right there, like so. Now the first one we're gonna say is dialogue. Okay, now the second one we'll say options, or actually we'll be consistent and call it questions. If I really wanted to be consistent, I could call this answers, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. What I am going to worry about, though, is this needs to be a variable. This one also needs to be a variable. Alright, so make sure those are clicked for both of those two. Now we can come here and say, right here, size to content. Alright, we got that. And did I actually, let me just double check something else, make sure. Yes, I did. I'm going to come here and say 1 on there. That way it brings it up just a little bit. That way it looks nice and fancy right there. Okay. So again, really, you could just throw that out there and use that as the idea instead, but I just did it this way. So when I told you to make this widget, right? This scroll box widget where you're putting all the dialogue and all the stuff. Right now, except for the size boxes, you should have the equivalent of this when we're adding all the questions and stuff. And I realize this is going to look real ugly. So if you use this now, and if you have a lot of things going on, like a lot of people talking and a lot of dialogue options, you're going to get this problem. And this is kind of what I just ran into when I was testing this earlier. Person talks, whatever, and you have all this. That looks terrible to have that many options out like that. So just throw in a size box. Give it some sort of maximum height and width of some sort. You can always change these settings later, but this is just what I found that kind of works for both of these scroll boxes. And then make sure that you put the scroll boxes inside the size boxes. That way it'll look a little bit nicer. So if you don't do this, it's just going to keep stacking like you just saw. But now that I've done this, I'm going to come over here, talk to this character again. And now I actually have a scroll box. Like, this is more presentable. Alright? So, sorry about that. I kind of I wasn't really expecting to test with that many options. Or when I was really testing, I didn't test with that many options. I only tested with like 4 or 5. You know, not like more than that. So, hopefully that'll fix that up and make it a little bit nicer. Now, under the graph, we're going to have an event. We're going to get rid of, let me just make sure we get rid of all, yeah, we're going to get rid of all of this. So we don't need it. Alright. What we are going to start with is we're going to say add dialogue. Actually, I got to make event. Custom events. Say add dialogue. Alright, we got that there. Now what we'll do is we will add an input right here, and we'll say unit answer. We'll say unit answer. Okay. We'll come over here. We'll make an index. We'll say integer index. Alright, we're gonna add another one for name. It's a character. We'll say name. We'll add another one. We'll say it's boolean and say use continue button. Okay, now we'll add one more for byte, a byte, and we'll call this voice. Voice byte. Voice byte. Alright, there we go. Now we'll come over to this, back in the dialog component, and let me actually bring it up. Go here. Alright. And what we'll do is we'll grab this right here. Should probably, no, I mean, we should probably check if it's valid first. But I don't think that'll be too important right now. Actually, yeah, that probably should be here instead of up there. So I'm actually going to delete that there. I'm going to add this right here instead because this is kind of more important. We want to make sure it's actually on the screen. It exists and it's on the screen here instead. Okay. After that, we'll say add dialog. We'll just come here. We'll throw that in there. Come on, break. Alright, there we go. We got that. Now we'll leave this as 0. That's fine for this. We'll leave this one at 0. Or not at 0. We'll leave it. We'll plug that in. Sorry. That index is 0. That continue button we'll throw right here. Let's make it nice and pretty. And then this voice will be whatever voice you pass into it. We'll leave that right there. Now, you can do a little debug test to make sure it actually works. I'm going to say print. Development only. Okay, yep, I know about that. Okay. Now we'll say worked. So print. So failed. Capital A, because you're awesome. Alright, there we go. So we won't actually see any dialogue come on the screen. I'm going to end this video in a couple seconds, but I just want to actually make sure we actually get to this point. Okay? So I'm actually going to come here, take this character, drag him out. We'll get rid of our sphere right there. We'll rotate him 180 degrees. Now if hopefully everything works out, because we didn't test anything this whole entire time. We'll come over to him. We'll actually hit it. And, oh yes, we have to change a couple things with him. First thing we're going to do is we're going to change the collision of him. Scroll down here. For collision right here. Actually, no, let's use the capsule. Use the capsule. And we'll, instead of pawn, we'll say default. Make sure this is set to block. So now we can actually interact with him. Another thing too is for display purposes, so we can actually see what's going on. We're gonna click not the camera, the boom, and we're gonna come over to this stock offset. We're gonna offset it on the Y about 50, and on the Z about 20. So there we go. So that way it'll be moved out a little bit, so we can actually see what's going on here. See that? So it's kind of hovering over his shoulder now. So when we actually try to interact with this character. And it didn't work. Alright. Slowly. Let's say print. Say print hello. Okay. Now we'll actually try and do this. Alright, so that actually got to that point. Come here, close that. We'll come over to this dialog component. We'll say, oh, yeah, that's right. This is not valid at all. This will never be valid because we don't actually have this set to anything. So we'll just hit that for testing right now. This will change later. We'll actually replace this with a test one. But we need to make sure that this is actually valid before we actually do anything. Otherwise, we're gonna be sitting here and I'm gonna be like really annoyed that nothing's working. All right, come over. Now it worked. See, it worked. That's great. So now at this point, it's gone through here. It added this. It went through here. Now it's over here at this point. Came over to this, and it kind of went over to here. Now what we'll do is, just so you can kind of see this, is kind of cool. We'll do a break right here. So when I actually play, you'll actually see it'll actually bring that up, right? Boom. Hit E, and now we're up to this point. This is the point of execution that it's on, which is such an amazing debugging thing. That's so cool about Unreal. We're here now, right? Now what we'll want to do is we want to finish this up after here. And actually work with this. We can actually start displaying things and stuff like that. Alright? Now, see you guys next time.